Hello and welcome everybody to Reedsy Live, another installment of our ongoing series of webinars where we bring on people from the world of writing and publishing to teach you how to write and publish better books. Usually we bring on some sort of author or novelist or editor, but I thought we'll shake things up for the start of summer, and we're going to have a webinar today all about poetry, and specifically how poetry can help one sharpen one's tool set as a writer. My guest today will be Emma Murf, a poet and writer from the United States, but based now in Europe. We'll bring her on in just a few minutes, but in the meantime, do let me know where you're coming from today and where you would rank yourself on the poetry scale from McGonagall to Burns, I guess, if we were to go from good to bad, how experienced you are. But yeah, why not share your favourite poem, perhaps, if you do indeed have one, and we'll see who is on here right now. Life Comics has been sitting here for quite, I think, for about half an hour. I've been watching your comments at Life Comics. You are very welcome. I'm glad to see you here. We have Costanza from Argentina. We have Kabura from Nigeria. Fantastic. Already hitting up the different continents. Miriam from sunny Arizona. Rachel from Fort Collins, Colorado. Willard from Woodland, Washington. Gary Young from Hood River, Oregon. Wonderful, wonderful. Maggot Eaters has already asked the question, what type of poetry do you guys like to write? Fantastic. If indeed you are a writer of poetry or just an appreciator or a complete poetry noob, yeah, let us know what is the deal with you and poetry. We have Julia from Ireland, welcome. We have Simon, a bad but aspiring poet from Norwich here in the UK. We have Doreen from Myerstown, Pennsylvania, fantastic. And just north of Doreen, we have Abby from gorgeous Connecticut. Abby, really selling the great state, or is it a Commonwealth? I never remember. We have Anne from Shropshire here in the UK. John from Cape Cod, keeping it northeast. We have Valerie from San Diego. There it is, West Coast representation. Well, we're just going to take a few minutes, but while we are pouring in, I might as well get some of the housekeeping out of the way. Today, as I've already mentioned, is going to be a webinar all about poetry, or specifically how you can use poetry to add power and depth and texture to your writing, if you're indeed not a poet. This is being live streamed right now, although if you're watching in the future, this is not being live streamed right now, this is in the past. But if you are indeed tuning in live and following on the chat, if somebody asks whether there will be a replay, you could do me a favor and tell them that yes, they can find it right here on YouTube. There will be replays available until the heat death of the universe or YouTube collapses, whichever comes first. Let's see. We have William from Arizona, Lou from Italy. Good. Some people further in Europe. I saw someone from New Zealand. Good morning. Thank you. I know it's very early for you there, so always appreciate when the Antipodeans do join us. Judy from Sarasota, Florida. Wonderful. Maria says, in poetry writing, she's like a 5. They write in English and Spanish, love Baudelaire and Maya Angelou, among others. Wonderful. Great. Chris Matthews from Somerset here in the UK as well. Good. Well, I hope everyone has been preparing for this. There will be a test at the end where you'll be submitting a poem. Like, that's optional, don't worry. But one thing I should also mention is that my guest today, Emma Murf, she is the writer of a brand new course on Reedsy Learning. If you like our webinars here, you may enjoy Reedsy Learning. There are free email courses where you can sign up and receive a lesson every day for 10 days. And they're on a bunch of topics, everything from writing short stories and characters and dialogue, to marketing your book, to designing your book, to pricing your books. But Emma's created a brand new course all about poetry, how to spark creativity with poetry. There's a link to it in the video description below. She'll mention it a few times, no doubt, and by the end, I'm sure you're going to want to sign up. It's absolutely free, no strings attached. So if you want to, just head into the video description and yeah, sign up. It's absolutely free, so I hope you do enjoy it. Okay, at this point, I'm noticing it is just about 8 o'clock here where I am in the UK, which means it's 3 p.m. on the East Coast, midday on the West Coast. I think 12:30 in India, 3 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong and China, maybe 5:30 or 7:30 in Sydney, depending on daylight savings. So, enough blethering from me, please. let me introduce my guest, who is a writer, poet, and the founder of the Atlanta-based PEZESTRIANS poetry workshop. Her writing can be found in the pages, physical or otherwise, of Slackjaw, Liminal Press, the Belladonna Comedy, and Sidewalk Poetry Press. As I mentioned, she's just created a new free course on Reedsy entitled Poetry: How to Spark Creativity with Verse. Please welcome Emma Murf. Emma, how are you?
Hello, how are you? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, coming through strong and clear.
What?
We have met in person before, so always glad to see an actual real life face that I can guarantee is a human being.
Verified. It's real.
But you are, I believe, currently in the UK, but you are not from here.
I'm not. I'm from the US. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. If I've got any Atlanta people in the house. I saw North Carolina, so that's close. I'll
Well,
count it.
I bet we have someone from Georgia here, so do let us know. Uh, but yeah, so yeah, unless you're going to cover it in your presentation, like what would you say is your background in poetry? What was the thing that sort of brought you to this art?
Yes. Well, actually, I am going to cover it. And in fact, it may be a good time to go to the first slide because I think it would be almost exactly an answer to that question.
And yeah, I think there's a lot to get on with. People, I'm sure, will still be streaming in, but they can catch up at any point of this. Uh, I'll be back for the Q&A at the end. Folks, I'll be also half minding the Q&A. I'll be running the slides, so I won't be able to pay as much attention as I would normally. DF says, Atlanta represent. Uh,
All right.
Jewel from Atlanta, wonderful. But I'll be back at the Q&A where there'll be, if you have any questions, feel free to repost them. I'll keep an eye out for them there. All right, well, let me start the slideshow, and away we go.
All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I started to say nice to see you. I cannot see any of you, but glad that you're here. Using poetry to become a better writer. That is the topic today. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a bit interactive. So be ready if you'd like to join in with some of these exercises, and let's get started. So to answer Martin's question here, what is my background with poetry? Hello, I'm Emma Murf. As way of introduction, I thought I would start with the first poem that I ever wrote. So this was back when I was in like the third grade, which you might have seen referenced in the event description. It says, I wore his clothes, I took his room. He's mad at me, oh, I assume. If he came back to such a mess, I'd try again, but sell for less. And this was, believe it or not, on listing my older brother on eBay, which you may remember was all the rage in the late 90s slash early 2000s when this was written. So why start with this poem of all poems in the world? If we go to the next slide. It's because for me, poetry has always been an act of play, a form of play. You know, I think as we grow up, we inherit this idea that poetry has to be unreachable in order for it to be good, that it has to be like this obscure and academic thing. But to me, poetry is actually one of the most playful genres. And I say that because, if we go to the next slide, poetry is really an exploration of language itself. So it's an exercise in, finding the words to say something, even when the thing we want to say feels too big for language that for the language that we have. And so the reality is, go one more. Go to the next slide. Perfect. Okay. Sometimes language fails us. So whether you write fantasy or romance or sci-fi, inevitably at some point you've come up against this experience where you have this idea in your head and just being able to get it out on paper feels so challenging. I love this piece from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by Eliot, where the speaker says, "It is impossible to say just what I mean." But poetry makes space to turn failure into opportunities. It gives us a place to play with language and all its imperfections directly. So I love this poem, this Emily Dickinson poem. It says, I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors. So, poetry, it's a very open-ended genre. It doesn't have to play by the rules of narrative or perspective that other genres might. And so in this way, it can be like an exercise in looking through a bunch of different windows at the thing you want to say instead of having to choose one particular door, to walk through. So that's what I mean when I say poetry is play. Not that it's always fun or that it's always easy, but that it's an exercise and exploration of language and in dwelling in the possibilities of language. And so if we look at poetry like a tool in dwelling in possibilities, it can help us move past writer's block. It can help open up these windows into our writing and ultimately improve the quality of the writing itself. And so we'll get into the good stuff. But first, I want to start with this poem. This is an intro to poetry by Billy Collins. He was the poet laureate of the United States in the early 2000s. I love this poem. He says, I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out. Or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin by beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. I just love that poem and how it really reframes the way that you look at poetry as a whole. It's not some riddle that has to be solved. It's, it's windows and to new possibilities. And so today we're going to cover 3 topics here, 3 key elements of poetry that make it useful to writing at large. So the first one is making comparisons. The next will be thinking in verse. And then we'll cover adding musicality to your prose. So let's dive in. All right. So to start off here with making comparisons, there's all kinds of tools for making comparisons. You have metaphors and similes and analogies. And if you head to the course that Martin mentioned at the beginning, there's much more of a deep dive into these in the course. But just for the sake of time, we're just going to talk about comparison more broadly here today. So I want to read this first example. I'm going back to T.S. Eliot, to the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It says, let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized on a table. And I love this simile because it's not at all where you expect the comparison to go, but because of that, it tells you something about the speaker. It gives you this real sense of unrest that's fitting for where the rest of the poem goes. And so comparisons like these are incredible tools because they allow you to position 2 images in the reader's mind and let them draw the connection, how they're actually connected together. And so what you don't say in this situation becomes as important as what you do. And so when we think poetically, when we think in terms of comparisons that are unexpected, we can avoid cliches. If he had written instead of like a patient, if he'd written like a canvas on a wall, spread out like a canvas on a wall, the thought would have just ended there. You wouldn't have had anything expansive or anything to ponder. But he's challenging us to really use our own imagination to fill in the gaps between, this one thing that was said and then this kind of non sequitur that seems to come after it. And that becomes a really incredible hook. So that's something you can use in your prose writing as well. So if we go to the next, I've got one more example here. This is from a poem I love by David Wagner called Lost. It says, stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. And I love that powerful stranger. It feels almost cold at first when you read it. You don't expect the word stranger to be what would be used to comfort someone when they're lost. But you realize, when you look at someone, when you look at it as a stranger, it's okay that you don't yet feel familiar with the environment that you're in. It gives you permission to learn it as if you're learning it for the first time. And so, you just have to think about what it says about your speaker, whether it's the narrator speaking or the character speaking, that they chose that comparison in the first place. And so if we go to the next slide, we're going to do our first exercise here. So I went to my dear friend ChatGPT, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and I asked for just an opening to a story. with comparisons in it. And it has two comparisons here, but they're both pretty expected, which is kind of the common scenario with ChatGPT. So I'm going to read it. And then I'm going to give us a few minutes, and I'd like you to replace the comparisons that you see in here with something a little more unexpected. Think about something that might tell you something about the speaker, maybe about the figure. There's a figure mentioned in the paragraph, or just about where the story is going to be headed. And I want to know if you have some writing, some narrative writing that you're working on that you would like to use instead. You're very much welcome to do that. You don't have to use this paragraph. But for everybody else, so I'm going to read it once. The sun sank below the horizon, casting a soft glow on the cityscape, like a painter's stroke on a canvas. As twilight arrived, the city came alive. Lights dotted the streets, resembling a starry sky. Amidst it all, a lone figure stood. Very eerie. So let's just take maybe about a minute to 2 minutes, and just think on what might be more interesting comparison that you could make. And then feel free to drop them in the comments.
Cool. I'll just sort of pipe in here just so you're not sort of speaking to yourself. I think it usually takes about 20, 30 seconds, a bit of a video delay, so we'll probably have to wait a minute before we see anyone come up. Oh, although we already had someone here, so let me bring it up. Mr. Luigi, like a drop of ember.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think there's kind of an eeriness to this paragraph to me. I don't know where this lone figure is coming from or where they're going, and I think a word like ember kind of makes me think that there's a flame. So that's really nice. That plants a seed in my mind.
Well, Natalia says, well, the visual between a painter's stroke on a canvas, usually made to describe nature, is used for a cityscape. That's interesting. So Natalia is a fan of what ChatGPT has already done here.
That's true. We probably should give some credit. That is an interesting kind of reversal there. That's definitely true.
Mallory is here, like the fade of a melted candle.
Oh.
Lights dotted the streets, resembling a dwindling fire. So I guess two sort of fire images here.
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of fire, and it makes sense to me. And what I like about the last one, it feels instead of like the fire starting up, but that like it's dwindling out. There's something almost tragic about that, and it makes me feel for the lone figure actually, instead of being wary of them. So that's interesting.
Oh, DJ Bogner here, like a fisherman's bobber in the sea.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's really nice because what I like about that is how unexpected it is. It's in such a different setting than the one that's being described. So it really does what I was describing with Elliot, where you put these 2 points on the map in someone's mind, and they have to really fill in the blanks. And there's so many different places they can go with that. So that's cool.
Oh, Cindy H, like a lighthouse in a fog.
Oh, but that's nice too. Like a lighthouse fog.
Soft glow. Yeah, I would say it's expected, but still a lovely image nonetheless.
And a little eerie still, like I don't know, and like, but also kind of hopeful. Like the light is going to guide you somewhere, so that could go a lot of different directions. That's interesting.
Oh, this one says something, I think, about the character or the writer. Like the ice that floated below the orange liquid still in her glass.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's great. That really tells you something about this person that you're ideally going to come to know. I really like when comparisons are incredibly concrete and tangible, but just unexpected enough that it requires a bit of thinking to get you there, and you have to kind of take the concrete thing and make it abstract in order to make the connection. So it's really nice.
Hank Smith has one here. Casting a soft glow on the cityscape like blood on the street.
Oh
Lights
yeah, that's
dotted
very in a
uh,
twist.
broken glass. Yeah, this is a like real hard-boiled wonderland here.
Yeah, that's nice. And the broken glass is nice, actually. Like the way that I imagine it would reflect, with the lights dotted on the street. And Yeah, that might be something that would even already be on the street, but just kind of drawing an extra layer of connection. That's cool.
Just one more, maybe. We've got from Barbara, uh, casting a soft glow on the cityscape like the smouldering ember of a half-smoked cigarette.
Oh, that's great. That's
And
really nice.
lights dotted the street, resembling fireflies in the summer sky.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was first reading this, I was thinking of fireflies too, and how, I'm fascinated by firefly. I actually wrote a poem about fireflies once. I'm fascinated by how kind of temporary the light is and how it comes and goes. There's something really fascinating to that. Cool. All right. Well, I'm sure that there were many, many more beyond just those as well. Thank you, everybody, for participating. But yeah, this is a really fun exercise just to kind of get you out of your head a little bit and think a bit more abstractly. Give yourself permission to draw comparisons that maybe don't even have a really clear explanation on the surface, but that the person has to really dig into a bit more. So. All right. So, with that, we are going to move on to thinking in verse. A lot of you may be familiar already with the difference between prose and verse, but we're just going to do a quick refresher here. So, prose is generally referring to writing that doesn't have a metrical structure to it. So, I like to say it just sounds like regular human speech versus a song that you would hear on the radio. So we'll take, for example, the opening to The Great Gatsby, which says, "In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since." Still, well written and has even, you might say, a bit of a poetic quality, but it certainly sounds like speech when you read it. And you don't get the sense that it was written to be separated into verse. Which brings us to verse. Verse typically has a distinct rhyme, which is what we call meter. So rather than using kind of like the building blocks of sentences and paragraphs that prose would use, it uses lines and stanzas. I have pulled as an example my favorite Shel Silverstein poem. I grew up on Shel Silverstein. This is just a 2-line poem. It says, "I made an airplane out of stone. I always did like staying home." I love it. It's great. So, you can see here that there's a distinct rhythm. The lines have a similar length, in this case, the same length, and that there's a distinct line break. So you get the sense. And then if you were to see a longer poem, it would likely be separated out into some stanzas. So that's the primary differentiator. And so, going on to the next page here. So, treating prose like poetry. So, we know the difference between prose and verse, but how can we use this idea of verse to enhance our prose? And what I want to say about this, and I dive into this a little more in the course about how you can really think visually, but really you've got to think about your page as if it's a canvas. So, as the poet needs to choose when to break lines and stanzas, so does the novelist need to choose when to break sentences and paragraphs. But you can be really thoughtful about that and think about the experience. When a reader opens a book, they're going to get an initial impression just from the way it looks visually on the page before they even read a word. And so I know this font is very small, but do not fear, because we're not even going to read it. We're just going to treat the words like it's a piece of art, and this is just the stroke. So if you look on the left, this is a screenshot from a page of Jane Austen's Emma. You can see it's really tight. The paragraph is lengthy, and it just feels like soft and succinct. And you really get a sense from looking at the page that there's going to be a lot of order, and there's almost a calming feeling by looking at it. So this is from chapter 3 of Jane Austen's Emma. Alternatively, we're going to look at chapter 3 of Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. Also a great novel, but a very, very different novel. Just when you look at the page, the sentences are extremely short. The paragraphs are extremely short, and it almost has this jagged appearance. It feels a bit erratic, and that actually really gives you a good sense of what the story is going to be like, and it does come to feel like that when you read it. Kind of chaotic, kind of erratic, and very intense. And those short sentences and those short paragraphs force you to be really present and kind of hanging on the edge of your seat. So just totally different feel. So when you go to write, think about, not just what am I saying, but how am I presenting the words on the page? All right. Real quick, I just wanted to touch on a couple of edge cases because, we talked about verse, we talked about prose, but of course, there's always going to be some gray area in between, and they're actually pretty interesting. So the first one here is novels in verse. So these are novels that are written in verse like poetry. So that means, they have line breaks and they're positioned like this on the page, but they have a narrative arc of a more traditional novel, such as like a fiction novel. So this example is from a Dominican American slam poet. Her name is Elizabeth Acevedo. The book is called The Poet X. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. But I'm going to read this to you. I think you'll be able to feel the poetic quality in the way it's read. But of course, also you can just see it how it is on the page. So it says, "The summer is made for stoop sitting. And since it's the last week before school starts, Harlem is opening its eyes to September. I scope out this block I've always called home, watch the old church ladies, chancletas flapping against the pavement, their mouths letting loose a train of island Spanish as they spread he said, she said." So using a lot of poetic devices there, you can even see the comparisons coming in like we talked about earlier. But it's split up as if it were verse. But if you read it all the way through, there really will be this narrative arc like you would in a novel. So just a little bit interesting, something to know. And then the last one here, this is prose poetry, which is essentially the direct inverse of what we just talked about. So with these, you're going to share the thematic elements of poetry. So things like alliteration, which we'll get into in a bit, metaphorical language, but it's going to appear in paragraph form. So a great example of this is Maggie Nelson's book Bluets. Beautiful book. She's kind of trying to come to terms with her sadness by talking about her affinity for the color blue and the time in her life when she was collecting all these different things that were blue. I highly recommend it. But I'm going to read a piece of it. You'll see it's numbered. Essentially, the book is just paragraph after paragraph, each with a number, and they're almost like little mini poems. So it says, "Why is the sky blue? A fair enough question, and one I've learned the answer to several times. Yet every time I try to explain it to someone or remember it to myself, it eludes me. Now I like to remember the question alone, as it reminds me that my mind is essentially a sieve, that I am mortal." So this is an example of prose poetry. So I bring these up, if you're wanting to dabble in poetry, but you don't want to abandon your narrative roots, then maybe you consider prose poetry or novels in verse, or at least pick one up and read it and see if it sparks anything. All right, so this brings us to our second exercise here. This is a fun one. I believe Martin is going to attempt to drop this into the chat so you all can copy paste it. But essentially, this is an excerpt from the opening of the novel Anne of Green Gables. And we are going to add line breaks wherever we see fit as if it were a poem. So, a couple of things to think about here. Can you use line length and negative space to evoke certain emotions? You can drop in line breaks, but also your words don't all have to be left justified like they might be in a novel. You can pull some lines further out. You don't have to have just one space between every word. You can give multiple spaces between words that need a little more emphasis. And this is something that the course goes into a little more detail on. Other things to think about: are some lines longer than others? Are there any words that get their own line entirely, maybe? So just keep that in mind, and I'll give a little bit of time here.
Oops, sorry, I'm just cutting through to here so I can go to another screen and then pin the comment to the top. This is
No,
largely just to prevent people from seeing my messy desktop. So yeah, pinned it to the top of the comment, so you should be able to copy it and paste it. And then, if you want to actually try your own line breaks, I think if you press enter in the chat, it will basically send the message. But I think if you press control enter or command enter, they'll give you a line break, and so you can play around with that.
Yeah. Or if you're on mobile, you can go into your notes app and play with it there.
Uh, the way I'm the way I'm seeing it, I think it's just taking away all the line breaks. So
And back into paragraph form or into one long.
just put it all into one. So I think everyone is, I think, making an effort to send it, but it's all exactly the same.
Oh, I see. It won't let you. Well, if anybody wants to describe maybe the approach that they might take, I can tell you a little bit about the approach that I was taking. I don't have the excerpt up in front of me right now, but if I can remember, there's that part in the beginning about dipped down, and to me that's begging for a line break and another line break, and then scooting it over so it's physically feels like it's dipping down the page a bit, and just giving that verb a little bit more space to be emphasized.
All right. So for folks sending in their version, let's just say it was a valiant effort from all around, but this may not be the platform for it.
Apologies, I gave us
Oh,
an impossible assignment.
although Kelly does say use slashes instead to denote line breaks. That's a good idea.
That's smart. Don't know why we didn't think of that.
Look at big brain on Kelly. Good idea, Kelly.
Kelly.
All right. If someone wants to try that, we'll do an example of it.
Yeah.
Are
And
you?
oh, sorry.
Sorry. Were you always an Anne of Green Gables person growing up?
You know what? I've actually never read Anne of Green Gables, and it's been on my list to read for so long. But I was thinking, like, what's a novel that just opens cleanly, and this was the first one I thought of. So maybe now, after I create my poem, I'll be tempted to read it.
Well, okay. Here's one from D.K. Griffith.
Oh, nice. Yeah, dipped down. I like how that breaks just before down, like dipped down, so you really feel the drop when it hits there. That's nice. By a brook. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, something that we get into a little bit more in the course is the idea of enjambment, and breaking a line in the middle of a phrase can often be really interesting because you almost read it in two different ways. So that's something else that we could consider here. Let's see. Let me see this one. Oh, see, and I like this. This is kind of an example of enjambment right here. Mrs. Rachel Lynde lived just where but it breaks after lived. So as a reader, you start with Mrs. Rachel Lynde lived, period, end of thought. And then you continue on. It's really powerful. I like that a lot. Little hollow fringe. Oh, and there's another one, ladies. So yeah, that's actually when I was thinking about enjambment, where I was thinking about it. Fringe with elders and ladies, line break, eardrops. So when you look at it on the page, you almost think it's fringed with ladies, and then you get the rest of it there. It's a nice way to create a bit of duplicity in the person's mind. It's really nice.
That's fun. You're sort of like forcing unusual imagery into people's
Yeah,
heads. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I'll throw one more up from Mr. Luigi.
Oh, nice. Just nice. This is nice because that first line is very long, and then the second one's quite short, and so you really feel it slow down there for just a second. Yeah, and then it continues back on, and so where you break the lines really, it very greatly affects the pace that somebody's going to read it, but also kind of whether they're going to read it with a rush of excitement or even anxiety, or whether they're going to read it like it's been very calmly crafted. So um, if, for example, you want to create a sense of anxiety, you might have a very long run-on kind of thing. Um, so anyway, this is just an interesting exercise. If you feel like you're stuck with a paragraph that you've written, if you're up against some writer's block, my recommendation would be go back to the last thing you wrote and just try this exercise with it. It'll show you kind of where the energy is moving in the paragraph, and help you think about maybe where you might move next. Kind of continue the energy on for you. All right. Now on to the third one here. This is adding musicality. So the history of poetry and music is incredibly intertwined. Some of the oldest poems, the ancient Greek poems, were performed accompanied by a lyre, and music was very much at the center of poetry. They're very much one and the same. And I think where this connection comes, what makes poetry so musical, really has to do with one word, and it's repetition. And so, of course, you might think of repetition of stanzas. That would be like a chorus in a song. Repetition of words, you see a lot in music too, but also just repetition on a micro scale, repetition of individual sounds within the words themselves. And so we're going to focus on we're going to kind of do this in a funnel. We're going to talk about some bigger kinds of repetitions, so rhyme and some of those more traditional kinds. Then we're going to go down to the narrow kinds of repetition, and think about how you might be able to apply those kind of sonic qualities to your prose to kind of knit it together and make it sound a little more pleasing to the ear. So this is our last exercise, and it's going to be a bit of a game here. Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about a couple different kinds of repetition, but I want to see, I've actually pulled all song lyrics as an example, as proof that poetry and music are one and the same. Well, not one and the same, that maybe not be fair, but are very intertwined. So I want to see if you all can name these songs. Hopefully they're not too challenging. So anybody got this first one? Love is a burning thing, and it makes a fiery ring. We probably have something.
Oh, we will have. Like, we'll see if who
Oh, I need
has
to
it first.
wait.
There's a delay.
Sorry, everybody. Okay, I'll wait a second, but I'll go ahead and tell you this is perfect end rhyme. So thing and ring, um, perfect rhymes and coming right at the end of each line. That's called a perfect end rhyme. And then I'll go ahead and talk about the next one, which is slant rhyme. This is, well, I tumble out of bed and stumble to the kitchen, pour myself a cup of ambition. So if anyone's got that one. Okay, I see we've got it. Ring of Fire, Johnny Cash. Yes. My American Southern side is probably showing. Dolly Parton, that's right. Valerie's got it. Next one is Dolly Parton's 9 to 5. So kitchen and ambition, they're not perfect rhymes, but they essentially sound like a rhyme to the ear. And so that's called a slant rhyme, which you may be familiar with. All right. Yes. Nailed it. 925. So like Shazam live. Okay. Next up, I'll let you all drop in your answers. Hopefully this one is not too challenging. The answer is you're halfway there just by reading it, but this is for my UK audience here. So talking now about internal rhyme. And I want to really focus on this one. I want you all to pay good attention to this one because this may be my favorite poetic device of all time. So internal rhyme is when there are two words that rhyme, but they're not at the end of the line. So, hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. What I love about internal rhyme is it just sounds knit together, but you don't necessarily know right away why. And then when you take a closer look, you can see, yes, the Beatles. Love it. Okay, and then alliteration over here, another Beatles classic, whisper words of wisdom, let it be. So we're getting a little more small scale now. Alliteration is repetition of the very first word across a string of words, so that W, whisper words of wisdom. All right, now at the smallest microscale here, repetition, and you may have heard these words in school, assonance and consonants. So assonance is repetition of vowel sounds. Notice I said vowel sounds, not vowels. So, you have this OW here and this OU. They're not the same letter, but they have the same sound. And sometimes you'll have the same letter with different sounds. It's not really assonance because it's really all about the sonic quality. It needs to sound similar. So we have Rose Flowin' with your chosen family. Can anybody, we'll take submissions for the artist, but also for the songs, because these ones are not as clear. And then on the right, consonants. This is a repetition of consonant sounds. So she wears short skirts. I wear t-shirts. And notice it does not have to be at the beginning because that would be alliteration. It can be anywhere in there as long as it's repeating. Yes, Taylor Swift. A classic. All right. We will go on. All right, so now it's time for the third exercise. This one we're going to do all together. So basically thinking back on these devices we talked about. Perfect end rhyme, slant rhyme, internal rhyme, alliteration, assonance and consonants. We're going to see where we can spot these in, I think, 3 different examples. So just take a second here. This is his palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's vomit on his sweater already. Mom's spaghetti. And apologies to anybody who's in their dinner hour that this is our example. So if anybody has anything they spot here, I'll give it a little bit more time. And just note, you don't necessarily need to, memorize what all these different kinds of repetition are. It's more important that you just can spot them and think about incorporating them. So whether you're like, oh, is that alliteration or is that assonance, or that's less important. It's just about knowing how to use them.
I hear, and this may or may not be true, that Eminem owns a restaurant in Detroit called Mom Spaghetti.
Is that true?
I
Oh, I
heard it somewhere. It's like an Italian family restaurant.
Oh, that would be great. I really hope that's true. I'm gonna tell myself that's true. I'm gonna
Mr.
believe that.
Luigi, in again with sweaty, heavy already.
Yeah, sweaty, heavy already. Yep. Yeah, that really, like, the sound is repeating a lot. And so that's assonance, the but also it's a bit of rhyme, sweaty and heavy, and already you could consider slant rhymes. You have knees and weak. Yes, yes. Knees and weak, some good assonance there. Yep. Spaghetti. Yeah, all of those. And when you see it kind of written out, like when it's stretched out a bit more, I think originally there it's in like 2 lines instead of 4. So you've actually even got some internal rhyme going on because it's not always, right there at the end. So vom and mom. Yeah, that's a good one. And that's one that I think it's easy to miss because it's in the middle of a word. But like vom and mom are similar sounds. Even palm and arm kind of mimic those. So that's some assonance there. Yeah, and some internal. Yeah. Yeah, we've got a lot in this one. So if we go to the next slide, did like a little bit of a breakdown here. Yeah, okay, so you can see, and the red is all of that rhyming, and a little bit slant rhyme going on there. And then also notice, I don't know if we mentioned this, that the underlined S's, that's some consonants going on there. Palms, sweaty, sweater, mom's spaghetti. So just in these 4 lines, it is packed with all kinds of poetic devices. And I think we're all born with some kind of musicality to our ear. We just know when something sounds good, but may not know how to break it down. But I think when you do an exercise like this, you can really see why is it that this is so sticky. That it's so easy to remember and it's so fun to say. So. All right, so where are my musical theater fans? This is from Hamilton the Musical, which is just packed with with poetic devices, tons and tons of all different kinds of rhyming and assonance and consonants. So I'll read. This one says, "Sir, I heard your name at Princeton. I was seeking an accelerated course of study. When I got sort of out of sorts with a buddy of yours, I may have punched him. It's a blur, sir. He handles the financials. You punch the bursar." So I'll give you guys a second because there's a lot in that one right there. This is one of those that you hear and it's fun and it's energizing, and then when you really break it down, you're like, wow, there were just so many layers to it that I wasn't realizing.
Have you seen Hamilton in the theaters?
I have. I actually, when I was in New York once, I managed to get the tickets where you have to like stand the whole time.
Oh yeah.
But
Well,
you're able to get in. It was like when it was pretty new and was really tough. It was
okay. So you
incredible.
saw it with Lin-Manuel Miranda, original cast.
Yeah, it was incredible. It was really
Nice.
incredible.
Uh, cool. Let's see what people are doing. Oh, here we go.
Study buddy. Yep, that is a perfect rhyme, but not really an end rhyme. It's like a perfect internal rhyme, essentially. Which course out of sorts. Yeah, sort and sorts is like just straight up repetition. And then, course in sorts is you could consider a rhyme or slant rhyme. Blur, sir, burser. Yeah, that one really blows my mind, especially that the word burser is just like a double repetition of that same vowel sound, that assonance. That's
And he's talking to Aaron Burr, sir.
Yes, yes, that's true. Oh, it's genius. It's so genius. Uh-huh, of course. Yours is uh-huh, yeah. And rhyme, internal rhyme. Yeah, the S sounds are all over this. It's true. And the C's. It has a very it's very tactical when you say it. I don't know. It's fun to say, and it really pronounces itself, makes itself heard, which I think was a bit the point.
Oh, this is a good spot.
Handles and financials. That's a really good one. Yeah, yeah. To rhyme those two is really um, really smart.
Should we bring up the
Yeah.
correct answers?
Now I don't know. There's always things that that you might not see, and in fact, I have hand and finan, but really you could do the whole word: handles, financials. Yeah, sir, heard. You've got that study and buddy, and that's what I was talking about earlier. That internal rhyme that I love so much because it's not exactly what you're expecting to hear. It's not right at the end, but it has that cohesion. And what it does, because it comes in the middle of the next line, is it's just sort of like a check-in point for the reader that keeps stepping them forward, a little step, a little step, a little step. So it really allows them to keep reading, kind of draws them in. Yeah.
Oh, Maggot Eater appreciates this.
Enchanting and enjoyable teaches everyone entertaining English. Wow, that is some wonderful alliteration there. I love it. Should make that my whole bio. Love it. Okay, last one here. I wanted to bring This Is Not a Song. It is actually from a novel, it's from a memoir. And I wanted to bring this as proof that you can use this in your prose writing. Mary Carr, I love Mary Carr. She considers herself to be a poet first and then a memoir writer next, but is one of the most infamous memoir writers of our day. And this is from her book, The Liars Club. It says, that bar also delineated the realm of sweat and hourly rage, the working world that college was educating me to leave. Rewards in that realm were few. No one congratulated you for clocking out. So, can anybody spot them in here? They're a little more hiding than they would be in a song, but there's a lot of repetition going on in this little paragraph.
Is this a relatively contemporary memoir, or is it?
Yes, it is. I don't remember exactly when it came out, but I know I read it maybe 3 years ago, and I think it was relatively new. So, alliteration in working world. Yes, that's great.
And wage leading up to it?
Delineated realm, sweat. Yeah, yeah. Few and you. Yep, that's nice. And it's nice because it doesn't look like a rhyme. Um, yeah, oh, that's an interesting one. Wage and college. I didn't think about there's definitely some similarity there, a bit of maybe like a slant rhyme going on. Congratulate and clocking and reward and realm. Yeah, it's really nicely done. It's not over the top to me. It doesn't stick out at you. It doesn't feel like she's trying to be poetic. But it really draws you in. It makes every word feel like it counts. Educated, congratulated. Yep. Yeah, that one's really nice, and the distance that those words are from each other is really nice. It's like just far enough to where you've almost forgotten about the previous word, but your ear hasn't forgotten, and kind of brings you through. All right. I think I marked this one up too, but I think we've identified most of them there. Yeah, a lot of that wage work and that alliteration there, rewards and realm, which you could also consider consonants. Um, one con kind of has a similarity going there, a little bit of assonance, clocking out. It's a little kind of a stretch, that one. Realm and sweat. Yeah, it's nice. It's subtle. I like it. All right, so we're gonna do a little summary real quick. So we talked a bit about, considering writing as a form of play, being exploratory. We talked about making comparisons and doing so in a way where you were using following an untraditional train of thought and making an untraditional comparison. Um, Thinking in verse, considering your line length and your paragraph length, and what is that kind of implicitly communicating to your reader. And then lastly, what we just went through, which is adding musicality, considering how certain types of repetition, like assonance, consonants, internal rhyme, those three especially, because they are, I think rhyme sometimes feels clunky or difficult to work into prose writing, but those three, they're very subtle. And so how can you add those into your work to kind of bring a sonic quality to your writing, and make it a little more enjoyable to read? And so that is what I have for today, but I wanted to close out with a poem. This is by Brad Aaron Maudlin. I love this poem. I just think it's a great reminder of how poetry can be played. We talked about how poetry is like looking through windows at your idea instead of having to enter through a door. And I thought this poem was just such a great window that he had found, such a great concept. He's thinking about how difficult life can be sometimes and all the lessons that you don't learn growing up, and you become an adult and you think you should know by now, or maybe you have to teach them to yourself. And I love this poem. He basically assumes that all of those were just taught on that one day that he was absent from fourth grade. So closing the loop here, I started with my third grade poem. Here we have what you missed the day you were absent from fourth grade. He says, Mrs. Nelson explained how to stand still and listen to the wind, how to find meaning in pumping gas, how peeling potatoes can be a form of prayer. She took questions on how not to feel lost in the dark. After lunch, she distributed worksheets that covered ways to remember your grandfather's voice. Then the class discussed falling asleep without feeling like you'd forgotten to do something else, something important, and how to believe the house you wake in is your home. This prompted Mrs. Nelson to draw a chalkboard diagram detailing how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks, and how not to squirm for sound when your own thoughts are all you hear, also, that you have enough. The English lesson was that I am is a complete sentence. And just before the afternoon bell, she made the math equation look easy, the one that proves that hundreds of questions and feeling cold and all those nights spent looking for whatever it is you lost and one person add up to something. Love that poem. All right. And so I think now, okay, I wanted to say drop me a line if you have any questions or any comments, or you want just to stay connected. You can visit emmamurf.com/poetry. That's my website, and all my contact info is there. So please feel free. And then, of course, we have this link here to the course. It's kind of clunky because I don't think you can click, but it is in the video description. So you can click through there and sign up for the course. It is a 10-lesson course, very, very short, very simple. Each lesson ends with an exercise on using poetry to spark creativity for whatever kind of writing you have. So I hope that you'll make use of that, the free course. And I think that's all I have, but maybe we have a little time for questions. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. Oh dear, my camera's gone. I know I have to use the wretched bad camera. Oh well. Here we go.
There
Uh,
you are.
all right. Thank you so much for that, Emma. We're having a Q&A now, as Emma said. The link to her course, I'm going to put it up in the comments in the chat there. So yeah, please do sign up. It's absolutely free, and it's a corker. It features lots of other great examples of poetry, and even if you have no interest in writing poetry, to sort of have it sort of broken down in such a way is always a treat. All right, I think we had a question from a little bit earlier. I'll try to dig that one up, but do send me your questions now. Well, here's a bit more of a sort of technical question. Google says, "Is foot a device used in poetry?"
Foot meaning like in the musical sense. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I know
Because
what's
like
meant.
in meter, I think like a foot is like an iamb, but I think like a single
Yeah,
unit of something.
this is where my poetry professors are going to be like tisk tisk. I believe so, and this is something I maybe. In fact, if you want to go to my website and send me an email, I can do some research and get back to you. But I can say that so iambic pentameter, for example, I believe it does use a combination of feet. It's like stressed and unstressed syllables. That's a really interesting style because it's actually meant to mimic the human heartbeat. It has five. I guess it's 5 feet. I think it's 5 feet. So the which, if you with patient ears attend, that's from Shakespeare. It sounds like the heart is beating, which is kind of a cool tool. So worth looking into.
We have a great question here from Catherine Polokovic or Polokovic. What's the fine line between poetic prose and purple prose?
Ooh, okay. I may need some clarity here too. Purple prose meaning what exactly?
Purple prose, I think, is usually when it's like over egged. Like if you task like
Oh.
a high schooler with writing, can you write something? Can you write something good? And then they'll probably go
Uh,
like,
that's a new one. I haven't heard that phrase before. That is a really good question. That's a good question. I think the poetic devices should be adding clarity versus obscurity for your reader. And I don't mean clarity as in they're easily understood the first time that you read them, but they're adding a layer to what you're trying to say versus putting kind of a fog in between you and your reader. I think that's a common thing. I know when I started writing poetry, I was like, okay, it has to sound poetic, it has to sound obscure. I was writing a poem about a mailbox, and I was like, I can't say mailbox. I have to come up with some other way to say it. And my professor was like, say mailbox. Tell people what you're trying to say. So I think it's really asking yourself, is this serving the story, or is it obscuring?
think of it, as soon as it starts drawing attention to itself, if the reader
Yeah,
stops and goes like, well, that's an interesting turn of phrase, then that's probably a bit purpley.
yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Alpha Red has a question. How do you recommend sprinkling some of these tips in a novel?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so the last ones that we talked about with musicality are probably the most directly applicable to what you have already written. So I think just basically doing the exercise that we did at the end with your own prose, take it and try to pull out, are there examples of assonance or consonants here that are kind of adding a bit of a sonic quality? And if you don't see it, then see if maybe you can swap a couple words here and there, or rearrange the way that you say it. Would start with that. And then I think just in general, some of the other exercises we did and some that are in the course are really great for helping you break out of that writer's block and just think about your novel differently before you jump into the actual writing.
And we have Mallory asks, how do you find publications for new authors looking to build a resume? Or
Ooh, okay.
poets?
Yeah, so like poetry specifically. Okay, there's a great website that's called Chill. I believe it's called Chill Subs. You can look it up. If you type in Chill Subs, I think it will come up. That is poetry centric, and they have a lot of places that you can submit. Sometimes I'll do that or try to find a poet that I like and see where has their work been published, and then see from there where I can start to publish. But and I believe that Reedsy actually has some poetry submission as poetry submission
We
um,
do.
resource.
Yeah,
Correct.
well, I'll link to that as well. But we have, I think, literary magazines, ones that sort of do take poetry. I'll link to that one as well.
Yeah, so that would be a great place to start, and you can kind of get a sense from reading them. What kind of work they publish. Are they looking for the kind of work that you do? I think, especially with any writing, but especially with poetry, it's not so much. It's such an open-ended genre. It's not so much about is this poem good or is this poem not. It's is this poem a fit for what they're publishing. So it's kind of finding that match.
Life Comic says, thank you. I learned more about poems here than in English class,
Oh, good. I'm
which
glad. I'm glad to hear that.
which is high praise for you and a stunning indictment of the education system.
Yeah, like I don't know. It depends.
Uh, Alessia Teroni asks, I guess this is a very, very nebulous question. How long does it take to become a good poet, a good poetry writer?
I'm probably going to answer this like a poet and say that there is no time, or maybe that you already are, and you just have to uncover it. I think certainly there are skills. I mean, we look at Mary Carr's example. I don't think that she sat down and went, okay, I've got to put assonance and consonants into this. It becomes like a muscle that you just exercise time and time again. So I do think over time you can develop that muscle and find your voice. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a journey. I don't think that there is a prescriptive amount of time, and I don't think that there should be. It's a lovely journey.
Um, ooh, Tom asks, can you overdo these concepts in a novel as well as underdo them? Spring a small piece of lovely poetic prose in a chapter, but nowhere else. Seems that you need to be consistent.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And you need to also think about, specifically if you're writing dialogue, is this fitting for the character? Would the character speak this poetically or not? I think you do have to. And then part of that, there's a piece, there's a particular lesson in the course about finding your poetic voice. And I think finding your voice as a writer is what will contribute to you being consistent. It'll just feel true to you or not true to you to do a certain thing.
Cool. Let's see. Is one from okay. Alvaro Gutierrez. End rhymes seem deliberate, whereas internal rhymes seem more of a consequence of the content, i.e., they occur spontaneously as part of the words used. Or is that what they want you to think?
Yeah, they're just being clever with it. No, it's true. I mean, we only have a limited number of letters in the alphabet. So eventually, you're going to happen upon a rhyme coincidentally at times. So it's true. It's true. But I do also wonder how much of that is just your brain kind of naturally making that connection and thinking, okay, this is going to sound nice, and it kind of flows that way. So,
I guess because of like how people are used to songs and poetry, like when you do have end rhyme, it is very obvious. Like after it happens once or twice, whereas yeah, that internal rhyme, like you can internal rhyme probably for a solid paragraph before anyone really picks up on it.
it's true. It's because our language is not, I think most languages are not designed for in rhyme naturally. So you have to kind of force your hand to get that to happen. Internal rhyme, not so much.
I could do one more question from RP. Can you recommend some modern poets that are a good introduction into poetry?
I absolutely can. So we read a poem by Billy Collins. I love Billy Collins because he's really funny. He's a really funny poet, and he's clever, and he's not funny for funny's sake. But he's a great introduction, and he actually has a book. I believe it's called 180 poems, something like that, and it's written. It's not his poems. It's a collection of poems that he's brought together, but it's written for people who kind of want to dip a toe into poetry. He also has a lot of collections out that are wonderful. We had a little bit of Mary Carr in here. She had a collection out that was wonderful. And then who else? Oh, Ada Limon is someone else I would recommend. She was the poet laureate of the U.S. I don't believe she's the current one, but maybe the most recent one. I believe that's right, or she may still be the current one. But she's great. People often would label these poets as accessible, meaning that their work is a little like easier to digest. But I don't look at that as meaning it's any less complex. It's just a nice first avenue.
The Billy Collins anthologies you were speaking of, it's Poetry 180 and then a follow up called 180 More.
Oh, so there's an extension.
Oh, yeah, there's a sequel, as you know.
That's really cool. There you go. Yeah, I believe that was his project when he was the poet laureate, was to kind of gather this anthology, and the poems in there are wonderful. And there's also a podcast called the On Being podcast has a sub podcast, I guess you would say, called Poetry Unbound, and it is fantastic. And they read a poem each episode, and then they dissect it, and then they read it again, and it's also very calming and nice. So that's another great one. It's Poetry Unbound.
Nice. Poetry Unbound. And Billy Collins, great recommendations. Emma, I want to thank you so much for putting this together for us. And of course, folks, if you enjoyed this at all, find the link in the description. Sign up for Emma's free 10-day course. You just get a new lesson every morning by email. It takes fewer than 5 minutes. to do. But there's an exercise at the end of each of them, so it'll get you writing poetry. So if you enjoyed the exercises we did today, then I think you'll get a kick out of it. Thank you everyone at home for tuning in. Really appreciate that. We'll have another webinar in a couple of weeks on a different topic. Emma, any last words of inspiration or anything you want to plug?
A lot of pressure. No, I would just say, like I said, poetry, it can be an act of play. It's an act of play with language. And so I encourage you, I hope, if nothing else, this inspired you to give poetry a second glance and think about how you might incorporate it into other aspects of your writing.
And there we have it. Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you there at home. See you all next time. Bye.